Hi, everyone, and a warm welcome to my focus session here today. I'm super excited to be joining. My name is Frida Almgren, and I am a comms expert. So we are going to discuss how to cut through the noise and become a media darling. And that is even so important today. We have so many platforms and so many different channels to communicate in, to really clear your messages. And before I dive into some different tips and tricks of how to become that thought leader, that media darling, I would just like to elaborate a little bit on why I think that earned media and PR is such a strong tool to position your company to get your messages across. So if we go back a little bit, I mean, we talk about mass media, right? Which feels so out of date today. We sort of consume the same kind of media in the morning papers, or the tabloids in the evening. We watch the same programs, the prime time, and television. So we sort of have the same framework for the world, the same context. And that is, of course, not at all the case today, because along came the World Wide Web, the internet, this huge network that connected us, everyone, across the world, and we could share information with the speed of the blink of an eye. And we could all, across the globe, share different views and opinions and thoughts. And alongside this, of course, came social media platforms. There are so many today. And the latest one to join these row of platforms is probably Clubhouse. And I think all these platforms they enabled every one of us to get a platform to share our voice, to share our opinion, to position ourselves or our company within a certain topic or a certain area. We could all become spokespersons. And that is a really sort of strong and cool thing that happens. And alongside this development, we've also seen that the interest and consumers' reactions to commercials, advertisements, are getting more and more negative. There are so many studies that show that we do not want to be interrupted by messages while we're doing something else, messages that might not even be personalized to ourselves and what we need and what is relevant to us as consumers. So the question is then, how do we get our messages across? How do we get that story across? Well, if you ask Bill Gates, it looks like PR, earned media, is a pretty good idea. And of course, in my role as a comms expert, I tend to agree with him. And I think there are, different reasons and multiple reasons for why this is such a strong tool. And the first one I would like to share with you is the credibility. So when someone else speaks about your brand, or if you as a spokesperson get the opportunity to share your views in an interview, that is through someone else, through a journalist, through, a media, and that gives so much more credibility to your brand, to your company. And it has been discussed for quite some time within our industry, how much more worth is it to actually get that earned media space compared to if you sort of buy the same space. And I don't know exactly what the percentage is. I think we're still debating, but I think everyone agrees upon that it is really, the credibility is so much higher when we talk about earned media. And of course, everything we read, hear, consume, watch, discuss shapes the image of the company that we read and hear about. So everything about your company then. So if that image is positive, which is just what you can build with working with PR and earned media and sort of steering the narrative, is really that people and clients and consumers do want to be associated with you as a brand, as a tech brand, as this innovator. So it really supports the business. It's also quite cost efficient. So if you do it in a smart and creative way so that people want to share and want to take part of it. So with that, I hope that you're with me that earned media is a really strong tool, and where a spokesperson or a thought leader is a really key ingredient to actually success, to be successful with your PR. And I would say that it all starts with a strong story. So you need to have something to share, right? Something that is interesting for many people, something that is different from other competitors within your space, something that tells the story of how you want to change an industry, for example. So that's a good starting point. And you can start to look inside. So why did we start this company? What was the passion? What was the idea? Is there something there that we could build into a great story? Is it something else? Is it something personal that I can add to it? And look inside your company and see what is there that we can mold into a great story. But also, of course, you need to open your eyes, and you can't just look at, from an inside out perspective. But, you need to do your homework to see what are the competitors doing with it within this space. How can we differentiate ourselves and position ourselves differently? So I think that is, two key things that you have to keep in mind when you create this strong story. And of course, if you have the competence in-house, you could start building this on your own, because a lot of startups and tech startups that I've and Spina work with, they have focused so much, firstly, on the product and the services, and maybe they don't have the abilities to mold and to create that story. But if you have, you can do it. You can also take some help from outside to get some experts to actually ask the right questions and to, steer the conversations. But often what we experience when we work with different companies is that there is so much to be told. So there's so many great stories, there's so much good information. And if you want to tell it all, and a lot of companies do want to tell everything, it so easily get blurry and fuzzy. So I think you need to prioritize, and you need to decide which are the key elements in our story. And then, of course, often this work happens in sort of the management team or the founder CEO level. And then I think once it's started, it's also important to share that story, that draft story maybe, to get feedback and to get that buy-in from the talents and your employees, who are also super important ambassadors for your brand, and try different ways of expressing how does that resonate with your different audiences, with your internal audiences as well as external one. And of course, super important, you need to be able to back up your story. If you say that you are a company that stands for XYZ, you need to be able to show that you're actually working this way, that your processes are in this way, and that you're doing business that way. So you need to have facts and figures and examples and proof points to back up that story for it to be really impactful. And in the matter of transparency, you have to have that. And also, I think it's great to look at a macro perspective. So what are we doing for the society? So we know today in the latest years, there's been so much focus on purpose-driven organization and purpose-driven businesses. And that is because of a reason, because they are often more successful in the long run. So I think if you can also add in, that element to show what are you doing? What is your part in this? 3 is a magic number. Well, some might agree with that, some might not, but it is a good number to keep in the back of your head when you talk about your story and your different messages, because our brain can't contain and remember too much information. So think about when you go into an interview or you go into an investor meeting or a pitch, what are the top 3 things that I want the audience to take away about our company so that you achieve your goal? And also, of course, who is the audience? Who is the receiver? You have to get to know them. You have to know what they like, what they're interested in, to make sure that your story resonates with them, that you're not perceived as spamming them. And it's also important to talk both to the brain and the heart, because we are not just rational people, we're emotional creatures, and we know that the engagement level goes up if you also add that emotional layer to your story. And of course, be patient. I mean, this doesn't happen overnight that you suddenly become a media darling. It might happen if you just launch something, but then the next day it's someone else. So this is a strategic work that needs to be ongoing, where you will see progress and where you will be able to, adjust it a little bit. So you'll have to see this as a long-term process at different arenas where you get your messages across in different ways. And I want to share 2 examples of companies that I think have a really strong story. And the first one is Oatly. I think most recently in the spotlight during the Super Bowl when they shared a commercial there. And I think that they are really clear in their messaging, what they're offering, not milk. It's oat drink, and it's good for the climate, for the planet. They are almost like activists in their messages, which is really inspiring and have a huge following crowd. And I think also they have taken the debate with Arla, for example, the largest milk producer in Sweden. We talked about a war between those two. So it's really interesting how they stood up for what they believe in. But also, if you are a company that is so typically niched and really loud about your values, you also need to be prepared that you can will get scrutinized and questioned. So, for example, when Blackstone invested in Oatly, of course, that stirred a lot of conversation and questions. And I think they handle it pretty well, but I think you need to be aware if you stick up your nose a little bit that you can actually back that up. Another Swedish example within the fashion industry is the brand Asket, and they are offering basic garments, t-shirts, and clothing that is really kind to the people and the planet. And they are really talking a lot about slow fashion. And they do this throughout everything in their sort of supply chain. So, for example, quite recently, they launched that when you buy something from them, you'll see on the receipt how much that has affected the climate and everything from production to shipping, etc. And for example, during Black Friday, where a lot of brands just sort of lower their prices and have special deals, they shut down the site completely. So they are really sort of living that brand. And I think that is really inspiring. But then again, when you have the story straight, you've set that and you want to get that across in media, it might also be quite good to know a little bit about how the journalist works and how they value news, because they got bombarded with different news from different companies, from people, and from everyone that wants, part of that spotlight. So I want to share a few news criteria that can be quite good to have in the back of your mind when you're planning your communication for your business. So the first one is conflict, and that's probably the strongest one. And if you think about it, ever since you read that bedtime story when you were a kid, to that movie or the series you watched yesterday evening at one of the streaming services, conflict is a really strong driver for the story. And here is, of course, when Twitter shut down Donald Trump, which stirred a lot of debates, of course, got a lot of coverage. And you might think, well, do I really want to sort of be in this bucket, in the conflict bucket, when thinking about proactive communication? But it could be the fact that you want to stir a debate. You want to share something that is, not a conflict maybe, but that is a bit polarizing. And I think that could be of interest then. So how can I do that if I want to stir some debate? Public interest, of course. So I know we're all super sick and tired of the COVID going on. It's still here. I hope we get some vaccine soon. But of course, that has been covered in every kind of media because it affects all of us in different ways. And we've seen the reporting change slightly. But if you have a news that are interesting to many people, of course, the likelihood that the journalist will consider that to be of value is higher. Also, identification or help journalism, as it's also called. It's basically when a journalist does some kind of summary. This one, they're looking at, the Greek islands guide, they're looking at the best sort of islands. And of course, if you're within tourism, it would be great to be mentioned in this article, but it could be about housing loans, interest rates, whatever. But if you are on the journalist radar, because you've been, sharing your story, of course, you might be included in this one, which is really good for your brand. Proximity principle, meaning the closer in geography, in culture, in time, etc., the bigger the chance that this will be lifted in the news media. So here's a Swedish example. So it's a restaurant opening in one part of Stockholm called Östermalm. So, of course, that was covered in the local news, but maybe didn't make it to the national press, for example. And this could be good if you're working at a tech company where your founder or one of your spokespersons come from a city somewhere and they have some local media. Maybe then you can do something with that angle. Current topics. So what's going on right now is of interest. So if you, for example, look at the calendar year, which is a quite good tool to use in this one. So every year in Sweden, the trade organization HUI, they name the Christmas gift of the year. So they announced that somewhere around November, and that's of course interesting and being picked up until Christmas, but it's not relevant in May, right? Or in April. So for example, if you are working with a tech company that's offering, an app that's supporting children with homework, for example, then you might be looking at school start at the end of August, because that could be a good time frame for you to talk about the topic that is close to your business. And the last one, sensation, maybe, the hardest one to really sort of tap into because it's things that are really standing out. So, finding life on Mars or finding cure for that disease that people have been working on for years. Or like this one, a 16-year-old climate activist sailing across the Atlantic. And that is, of course, sensational. But I mean, we have so many innovative people in Sweden. So no doubt it might be you that kicks in this sort of bucket of news criteria. But once now you have your story, you know a little bit about how the media works and what can actually become a news story. I want to speak a little bit about the spokesperson. So it's not enough just to have a story that sits somewhere in a drawer, but you need to have people that can tell and share your story. And we see that personal brands and the person behind the brands are getting more and more importance. We want to get to know the brand by the persons working there. So it's not just a logo, right? But it's actually flesh and blood. And that, back to the credibility, that gives the company a lot of credibility. And also, it can open new doors to new arenas if you have a really strong spokesperson in your company. And of course, in a startup, it's common that it is the founder or the CEO that is the spokesperson, because she or he started the company and can easily talk about it. But once the company grows, you might need to add more spokespersons, because the expectations from the society are higher on you and your company to express opinions in different ways, or driving different and more things. So then you need to decide who would be a spokesperson. Look at experience, look at personality, expertise. It's a lot of things. And of course that they want to do this. And also give that person the right platform to do a great job, to give them training if needed, to give them space to do this, to let them set off time to prepare and be in interviews, panels, at investor meetings, etc. Because everyone understands that this is a key asset for the company. This is a strategic asset. So be able to really do that. And we meet so many people when we do the trainings, and sometimes there is a person coming in and you can see on the whole sort of body language that I don't know why I'm here. I know my company, I know this, but once we start training in both sort of different exercises and the theoretical parts, they like, okay, so you learn so much and you can always, sharpen some different things. And I think it's a process. So I don't believe that anyone just wakes up and is born a fantastic spokesperson, but it is a journey that you have to do with the right, grounds to do a good job. And of course, you need to think about your voice. How do you use that to emphasize your story and to use it in the best possible way? And of course, the body and the face. How do you use that? Make sure that your facial expressions are actually in line with the story and the wording that you say, because everything communicates, not just the actual story. So here's two examples of, an open sort of posture and a bit more concerned, and just to be aware and know what that also communicates. So I would like to share 3 different inspiring people, spokesperson, that I think for different reasons is interesting. So Emma Frans is the first one. She's a scientific writer and she's a researcher at Karolinska Institutet, and she has been awarded different prizes for really educating people in Sweden. And I think we saw her so much during 2020 and connected to COVID. And what she really does so well is explaining this really complicated area. And I mean, there were so many words that I've never heard before connected to COVID. And she explains it in an understandable and easy way, giving examples, speaking a language just like you and me. And I know many companies that I work with, they use an internal sort of industry language and acronyms, and that's maybe fine internally. But externally, think about how can you simplify and exemplify your story. The second one is Sebastian Siemiatkowski, the CEO and founder of Klarna. And everywhere from the beginning, he was really clear about what he wanted to do. He was bold. He would like to challenge the traditional banking industry. He wanted to make payments easier, simpler, smoother, right? And I think he is bold and he's very opinionated. And it's almost like you can take anything he says and it's a headline. So that's something that you can think about. Can you be a little bit bold? Of course, within the company communications guidelines. But how can you share something that sticks out a bit, that really catches the audience? And the third one is Ela Bernadotte, co-founder of the food waste app Karma. She is really passionate. She's personal. She is knowledgeable. And you can really feel that she is in this for a purpose. And you sort of get engaged by her way of talking about the issue and about what Karma wants to achieve and how we can sort of waste less food. And I think that is also something to think about. How can you get that passion across and be as knowledgeable as possible? Because then also you will be an interesting person to talk to. So just to summarize, set the narrative, create a strong story, identify and give that spokespersons the right training and whatever they need to do a good job. And grab the opportunity once you get a question of doing that interview, being on the panel, take it. Because I mean, honestly, what is worst case is not Mordor, right? So instead, look at it as a huge possibility. So thank you so much for joining me here today. It's been super fun to be sharing this, and I hope you have some feedback, thoughts, and questions. So I would just, leave this meeting and pop into the discussion room. And if you would like to know anything else that we do, just check out comsworkout.com. Okay, see you soon.